Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ipieca's Low Emissions Pathways webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Robert Civita. I'm the Senior Manager for Climate Change here at Ipieca, and I'm pleased to introduce you to this webinar. Before we go ahead and get started and I introduce our presenters for today, a couple of administrative points. So, firstly, our presentation will last around 40 minutes this morning, and then we'll have around 15 minutes for Q&A. Secondly, we will be recording this webinar and posting it on our website following the event for others to be able to hear it. Now, in terms of questions, please feel free to ask your questions at any time by typing them into the Q&A box, and we will store those up and ask all of the questions to our hosts during the Q&A session at the end. Okay, so that's about it for administrative notes. So let's get on with the presentation then. So first of all, we have two great speakers for you today. Firstly, we have our Executive Director of Ipieca, Brian Sullivan. And Brian joined Ipieca in 2011 following a long 23-year career in BP. And during that time, he's had a variety of technical, commercial, financial and leadership roles. Then we also have Renato Di Filippo with Eni. And Renato has been working on climate change issues for the last 12 years in both consultancies and energy companies. Renato is currently the Climate Change Manager in Eni and is also our Vice Chair of the Climate Change Working Group here at Ipieca. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Brian to give you the first half of the slide deck. Thanks.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to speak to you this morning, and I've been working quite closely on this particular issue through Ipieca over the 5 years I've been in, and it's a fascinating area, and it's particularly exciting to see it from sort of the interface between the industry and the United Nations negotiations. We're right in the middle of it all, and it's exciting, very exciting area to work in. So I enjoy it quite a lot. Lorena, yeah, thank you. So this presentation is going to be a quick overview of some of the work we're doing. There's more detail will be available on our website, and at the end of the presentation you'll see the links to it and how to find the meat of the presentations and the documents behind it. The two icons on the left of this slide represent sort of two phases of our work on this particular topic. And our work here really has been sort of about building consensus across the Ipieca membership on the topic of climate change. And the top icon on the left is what we call the Paris Puzzle, where we set the scene for the challenge. And that challenge is to address the risks of climate change while meeting the world's energy needs. And we published that work in 2015 and presented it to all the stakeholders Ipieca works with over the time since then. And it's about how oil and gas industry sees itself playing a role in meeting the challenge of addressing climate change while meeting the world's energy needs. The second icon down in the bottom left it sort of represents our low emissions pathways, and I think probably the most significant element of this is that there are multiple pathways, and there are many permutations in terms of how to get from where we are now to our goals. Just running through, so the presentation over the next 40 minutes will cover who we are as Ipieca, current energy use, the challenge of the transformation and relating to the transformation in the global energy mix and the emissions resulting from it, potential pathways, the critical enablers to those pathways to a low emissions future, but also reflections on the industry's contribution to that transition. Firstly, just to introduce Ipieca, we're the Global Oil and Gas Industry Association for Environmental and Social Issues. We were established over 40 years ago at the request of the United Nations when they established the UN Environment Programme because they wanted a channel to liaise with the industry on key technical issues relating to the industry and environment. And to this day, we remain the principal channel of communications to the UN. And we also have another role where we convene working groups to share knowledge on key issues and also to develop good practice on improving environmental and social performance. I will point out that we don't have a lobbying mandate, so we don't lobby governments on policy, and we are a consensus-based organisation. So everything we do and everything we say is on the basis of consensus. We have three membership categories. We have company members who are involved in oil and gas exploration, production or refining. We have association members, so national and regional oil and gas associations. And our newest membership category, which was launched in November, is associate members, which covers service companies and engineering, procurement and construction contractors. Despite the market conditions, our membership's growing, and in fact 2016 saw our fastest growth ever with 4 new company members, and following the launch of the new category for service companies, we have 4 EPC contractors and hopefully by 5 o'clock today, 5. We also have a new association member in the form of AMEXI, which is the Mexican Oil and Gas Industry Association, who joined last week. But as you can see, it's a very diverse group of companies with different asset bases, ownership, stakeholders, cultures. And this makes the process of consensus building quite exciting, particularly on a topic like climate change. But we've done it, and this work is the output of that work. For this work, our climate change working group set up a task force comprising members experts on climate policy, science and technology to identify the key elements of low emissions pathways and achieve consensus on the implications. So the starting point for this particular piece of work is that Ipieca welcomes the Paris Agreement, and it calls on parties to aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible by holding the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. And then subsequently to undertake rapid reductions to achieve a balance between anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sinks of greenhouse gases in the second half of this century. Each country has pledged to establish nationally determined contributions, NDCs, and review these every 5 years. The current NDCs fall well short of delivering the aims of the Paris Agreement, and significant policy action, technology development and business response will be needed beyond them to achieve the Paris aims. The agreement identifies peaking global emissions as soon as possible and then achieving a balance between sources and sinks in the second half of the century. Net zero emissions does not mean a world with no anthropogenic emissions or one without oil and gas use. And the chart you see here is one possible scenario of how net zero emissions could look. The downward arrows show how the emissions are trapped or captured, the grey arrows, or offset by sinks of emissions, the green arrows. And achieving a balance means a world in which remaining unabated greenhouse gas emissions are offset by a drawdown from the atmosphere, negative emissions, to reach an equilibrium, also referred to carbon neutrality or net zero. Some fossil fuel consumption will not involve emissions, for example plastics, and some of that which does emit will be captured and stored without ever being released to the atmosphere using carbon capture and storage. And those emissions which the society is unable to abate, for example possibly dispersed sources such as methane from agriculture or from transport, would need to be indirectly withdrawn or offset through means such as reforestation to sequester carbon, or new technologies such as bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. The other significant agreement in 2015 was the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, containing the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. The Paris Agreement makes an upfront reference to addressing climate change in the context of sustainable development. The 2 SDG goals, particularly relevant to low emissions pathways, are Goal 7, to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all, and Goal 13 to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. However, all goals are important and interlinked, and the international community aims for all to be achieved. In 2017, we hope to publish an atlas we're developing together with the UN Development Programme and the International Finance Corporation that maps between the relationship between the oil and gas industry and the goals. So I'm now going to hand over to Renato De Filippo from ENI, who's the Vice Chair of the Climate Change Working Group, who's going to take you through the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Brian. So, next slide, please. How can I do
Renato, you can advance the slides yourself.
Okay, I will try, okay? Sorry that I'm trying to do it, but okay.
Yeah, that's good.
That's fine. So, today, around 1.2 billion people currently don't have access to energy. This means that we want to meet the world energy needs, along with the SDGs that Brian has just illustrated. In a world in the future of around 10 billion people, this implies that there will be an increase of primary energy demand of around 575 exajoules from today to 1,000 exajoules in 2100. And this is after factoring in energy efficiency and conservation measures. As the world moves towards fulfilling the SDGs, this need for energy means that the oil and gas will continue to play an important role for decades to come. Well, if we look at the current energy system, nowadays the fossil fuels cover around 80% of the global energy supply. And if we look at the use and the demand, some sectors of the economy are almost entirely reliant on the energy of oil and gas provides. For example, the global transportation system and also the feedstock. As per electricity, that is very important in the slide that we'll see for low emission pathways, nowadays only 20% is covered by oil and gas energy. Well, as the pathways to meet the Paris Agreement goals, let's say that the most cost-efficient method for reducing GHG emissions is for sure to save energy. The International Energy Agency projects that improvements in production and reuse efficiency could result in about 12% decrease in the energy demand by 2040. However, this can only slow GHG emissions but never stop them. Reducing GHG intensity of power generation can lead to electrification of other parts of the economy. One of the most cost-effective and impactful steps is to switch from coal to natural gas. Near-zero options include renewable as well and nuke. Long-term CCS with gas or even with biomass can produce net zero or negative emissions. Reducing emissions in other parts of the economy will require alternative energy carriers and strategy to electrification. For example, aviation might use biofuels. Heavy industry may require industrial CCS. For those areas still not updated, CCS with biofuels offers the promise of net negative emissions. That means that CO2 is used, for instance, CO2 is coming, for instance, from power generation, from biofuels, can be stocked underground, so producing negative emissions. Well, let's now focus on improving efficiency and saving energy. The most cost-effective method for reducing GHG emissions is to save energy. The International Energy Agency projects that a 12% decrease in energy demand by 2040. To maximize energy saving opportunities, various uptake will need to be addressed, including through increasing the information available to consumers and allowing the motivation of consumers to supply to save energy. While efforts to increase efficiency or reduce consumptions are critically important, all these efforts only slow the growth of GHG emissions that do need to stop. As per the power generation, in the near term, one of the most cost-effective and impactful steps that society can take is to switch from coal to natural gas. This step could cut emissions in half for every unit of electricity generated. Near zero emissions options include renewables and nuke along with sustainable biofuels. Longer term, the deployment of gas and biomass-based power generation with CCS would enable near-term emissions of carbon electricity or even negative emissions in the case of biomass, as we said before. Reducing the intensity of GHG of power sector could enable the electrification of parts of transport, residential, commercial, and even industrial sectors, thus decreasing the GHG intensity. Well, finally, as per the remaining end-use sectors, in order to reduce these emissions, we will require alternative energy carriers and strategy to electrification. These include hydrogen, biofuels, industrial CCS, and bioenergy with CCS. While these technologies continue to be developed, additional technical breakthroughs will be needed to achieve cost-effective deployment at scale. We need to transform the energy system. However, some areas of the economy, such as aviation, commercial shipping, heavy goods transport, and heavy industry, have specific energy characteristic needs that will be likely to require such alternatives. For example, as we consider aviation, it may use biofuels, or heavy industry may require industrial CCS. For those areas still not updated, CCS with biofuels offer the possibility to get net negative emissions, as we've seen. But now let's focus on carbon capture and storage. CCS would enable low carbon fuels and electricity to be used in transport, homes, and industrial sectors. Without CCS, cost of achieving atmospheric CO2 stabilization level would be much higher. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in the fifth assessment report, estimates that costs are around 150% higher in a 2-degree scenario without CCS. Large-scale CCS is a reality today. Through the deployment, although the deployment remains limited with around 15 large-scale projects globally in the world, the deployment of CCS on a scale that makes a material contribution to reducing CO2 emissions still required to address current barriers, including costs, complexity along the value chain, regulatory and policy uncertainty, public acceptance as very important in Europe, for instance, large-scale storage sites, and long-term liability issues. However, the key barrier to CCS is the development of policy to incentivize and underpin its development, creating a level playing field with other technologies. But in order to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement, we think that there are 3 critical enablers. The first is the effective policy. We think that effective policy environment would enable markets to drive the technology innovation, development and deployment, as well as the infrastructure necessary to transform the energy system at the least cost. Countries will need how best to design climate and energy policy to pursue sustainable development. However, market-based approach to put a price on carbon, such as carbon taxes or emission trading systems, are more economically and efficient options and are increasingly being implemented worldwide. Finance is the second critical enabler. Changes to the energy system in line with the low emission pathway, whilst also meeting increasing demand, will require massive shifts in investment flows to change from the energy system. The International Energy Agency estimates that $68 trillion of investments will be needed by 2040 just to meet the anticipated demand and without meeting the Paris Agreement aims. Finally, the third critical enabler is collaboration. We think that public and private entities at the national, subnational, and regional, local, and city level will all need to engage with each other, with academia, civil society, and private industry. Let's focus now on the first one of these critical enablers, that is effective policy. Countries at different stages and developments and with different states of energy independence will decide how best to design climate and energy policy to pursue sustainable development. However, countries are increasingly electing to implement various design of market-based systems and crediting mechanisms to place a price on carbon separate to the efforts to reduce emissions. Market-based approach such as carbon taxes, emission trading system, tradable permits or standards can generally be designed to be more economically efficient policy options than most industry-specific regulation, technology mandates, or non-tradable performance standards. Market-based policies are most effective when they are applied to all GHG emissions and provide a transparent and long-term price signal. They apply the costs of GHG emissions to the emitter to incentivize action, prevent or minimize carbon leakage, provide for linkages with other systems, hopefully with a huge global worldwide linked system, return revenue generated from the system back to the economy in a known distortionary fashion that encourages economic growth and limits regressive income effects. And finally, provides for accurate and cost-effective GHG emissions measurement, verification, and reporting. As per collaboration, governments alone cannot provide all the solutions. We know on our own that the private input is fundamental in order to make the government provide us with effective policies. The oil and gas industry has a long history of working with partners of different sizes and nationalities, and with also other private companies, NGOs, and governments to reduce and mitigate risks. So a strong collaboration among all the entities in society is needed in order to fulfill these very challenging objectives. Public, private, but also civil society, academia, and NGOs. Sorry, I have a problem just translating with my PC. I don't know what's happening, it doesn't go.
Okay, so we can see the summary slide now, Renato.
Okay. Let's go directly to the summary one. This one, okay? So, summarizing, Ipieca welcomes the Paris Agreement and believes that transition to a low GHG world is challenging, but it is possible. Due to the size, complexity, and growth of the energy system and time it takes to scale solutions, the transition will likely play out over the course of the century, with a continuing role for the oil and gas sector. Pathways to a low-emission future will require energy efficiency, electrification of new sectors, and alternative energy solutions such as hydrogen, biofuels, in hard-to-reach sectors. CCS offers solutions across these and almost uniquely offers the opportunity of negative emissions if applied with the biomass. Collaboration will be essential, along with effective policy and massive shifts in financial flows. The oil and gas industry is already playing its role through the deep skills and resources it has in energy system. For instance, let me say that according to the World Bank, from 2005 to 2012, the oil and gas system has already reduced worldwide emissions associated with associated gas by 20%. Finally, as per the role of Ipieca, as part of our efforts to collaborate more widely, we welcome a broader engagement and discourse with stakeholders on how the industry can play its role in addressing climate change. Ipieca's role is not to lobby or policy or to define targets or minimum standards. Ipieca develops and promotes good practices, raising the performance of the industry, provides fact-based information. We are a forum to bridge regional differences, be a constructive partner in the discussion, build relationships, and explore partnerships with other stakeholders, including UN bodies. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Renato, and to Brian also for a great overview of our new document, Exploring Low Emissions Pathways. And again, we can see that there on the left-hand side of this final slide. And the paper is available from our website at ipieca.org. And for those of you who might want hard copies, we can also supply those if you wish to do so. Just get in touch with us. So really, this presentation can be seen as part of Ipieca's continuing efforts to demonstrate the industry's commitment to addressing climate change issues and showing its support for low emissions pathways. So now we'll move over to our Q&A session. So please, if you haven't yet done so and you have a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A box. You can get by clicking on the Q&A icon. And we have a first question here for either of our panelists. So current projections based on NDC targets indicate that only half of the CO2 abatement needed to limit temperature to 2 degrees C is actually achieved. How effective are market-based mechanisms in giving the right signal to promote solutions and technologies in this context? So Renato, would you like to answer that?
Well, for sure, current, pledges, NDC cannot achieve the 2-degree scenarios. We don't think that carbon pricing is or market-based mechanisms are the only tools that can help achieving these targets. We think that they can be very cost-effective. It's not easy to understand if there are any, or to find any projections about how market-based mechanisms can help to achieve the 2 degrees C target. But for sure, in a world in which we will have a high enough signal to discriminate, for instance, between coal and natural gas, or coal and maybe other sources, and also to incentivize energy efficiency and use of fossil fuel, we will have to go ahead with these signals. But we need, I mean, a stable policy landscape with probably in the future a very wide system with many linkages at worldwide level, and this without producing competition distortion. For instance, what I want to say, concluding, what we are experiencing in Europe, for instance, and I'm based in Italy, so I know very well the European situation, is that the ETS didn't provide actually in Europe for an incentivation because the price so far is very low. But on the other hand, there are projections that say that by 2030, I mean, likely the ETS will achieve 30 euros or 40 euros, and this could trigger a differentiation in the sources in the power generation, for instance, so helping natural gas to displace coal. That now doesn't happen because the prices are too low.
Yeah.
I hope it can help.
Thanks, Renato. I think that is very helpful. And kind of building on that, really, as you mentioned, yes, I think Europe's a good example to look at for this question, because although we've had a emissions trading scheme for sort of 8 years, maybe 10 years now, you could argue that because it's not been quite sort of configured appropriately, the price signal has not been sufficient to generate change. So that's not necessarily that the theory of emissions trading schemes is not working. It's just that maybe they're not quite set up appropriately. But I think there's a broader answer to the question of how effective market-based mechanisms might be as well. And I don't know of the sort of 190 or so NDCs that were submitted, how many of them actually include proposals to use market-based mechanisms. But my guess would be that it would probably be sort of less than half of them, rather than anything more significant than that. And the other point to note, I guess, is the Paris Agreement sort of set out a little bit of an uncertain future as to how market-based mechanisms might actually be used, at least formally by the parties. There wasn't inbuilt kind of support within the Paris Agreement for having market-based mechanisms coordinated or supported directly by the FCCC process. They do recognise that countries may wish to transfer, I forget the technical jargon that they use now, but you may want to transfer mitigation outcomes, ITMOs, that's it, internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. So they're not they're not barred from the Paris Agreement, but similarly they're not actually singly supported. So it'll be an interesting one to watch, where how market-based mechanisms get used in future. Okay, so we have another question here. Can an internal combustion engine, for example a Wankel engine, if it's low emissions, be made standard? Why are we still using polluting engines? Shift to electric cars and hybrid cars is good, but would take many years. So I guess quite simply, you know, why are we still using combustion engines? Is there a better alternative? And Brian, would you like to take this one first?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. I think there are there are a number of sort of lenses to it, but there is a huge amount of technology development going on, even with existing internal combustion engines, to make them more efficient. And there are a number of paths which are being followed technologically in order to do that. And also there are an increasing number of collaborations between oil industry participants and the original equipment manufacturers to look at ways of increasing engine efficiency through various technological paths. In addition, with the existing technology, there's also programs such as the Global Fuel Economy Initiative, which Ipieca supports, which is a program aiming to improve vehicle efficiency by 50% over the period to 2050, recognizing that there's an expected increase in the world car population. There are also new technologies such as electric and hydrogen vehicles, which are under development. However, with all these, where we're talking about a change in the mix of the car population globally, these things will take time because there are some natural constraints, such that the global car population is around 1 billion cars. It's expected to grow to 2 billion by 2050, and the current capacity of the industry to actually make cars is a constraint on the pace at which this transformation can happen, whether it's even using internal combustion engines or the other technologies. So I think the current global car production capacity is about 65 million a year. So if you do the mathematics on that, with 1 billion cars growing to 2 billion, you can see that there's quite an extended time frame for a complete renewal of the car population.
Great, thanks. Renato, did you have anything you wanted to add on that question?
Well, it's very interesting and it's very technical questions, because actually a very little knowledge about the Wankel engine. I know it was proposed, if I'm not wrong, by Mazda at commercial level. I mean, in the past, I don't know whether they currently. I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, this goes towards the idea of improving efficiency in current end users. I mean, devices and users options. On the other hand, as per the fuel sector, I think that we have to improve efficiency by also incentivizing these kind of technology. But on the other hand, if we look at the future, we are going at least, in Europe probably, as projected, the European Commission, toward also an electrification of the current, transport system. But what is key, if we consider the electrical, cars, is how we produce electricity. Because if we have electrical cars and then we produce electricity with coal, then it doesn't make sense, because we are polluting much more than now. So it's very delicate. Probably in the future we will need, all these options for the transport sector, plus I would say biofuels. That's also another option, and for sure, so efficiency, electric cars, but with low carbon power and biofuel, and probably will take a little bit of years. I'm not so confident that it will, so easy, because of the cost also infrastructures. For sure, it's key also, the development of storage, energy storage, batteries, for making electrical cars be convenient. And also nowadays they are very, very expensive. So there are many, parameters and many variables that are still to be addressed. And for sure, the Wankel engine is one of, the options for the future. of the transport sector.
Great, thanks for that, Renato. Now, returning to our earlier conversation about market-based mechanisms and emissions trading schemes, we have a question here. Would the sort of cost projections that Renato you mentioned by 2020 be sufficient to incentivize carbon capture and storage, given the importance placed on carbon capture and storage in our presentation we've just given? So, Renato, would you like to answer that?
Well, actually, when I talked about 30 euros or 40 euros by 2030, it was not 2020 but 2030, so not 5 years, but not 3 years, I mean, sorry for years, but 13, 40 years. And if we look, so it is probably not enough, I mean, to incentivize CCS, because the projections are regarding Europe, firstly, and in Europe we have so far seen several problems. There is a directive regarding CCS, and this directive was also transposed in all national legislations, but there were many problems regarding, I mean, the exploitation of the CCS. For sure, the price is the first one, but it's not just price. Public acceptance, for instance, in Europe was a major problem so far, also for the demo project. And a third one is regarding what happens after in the sites we finish injecting, and then we have to go on monitoring, and then we have responsibility according to the directive also for some years later after we have finished injecting. It's not very easy. Anyways, if we go back to the costs, if we, I mean, look at the scenarios of the International Energy Agency, but also to, for instance, the most recent WIO of the International Energy Agency, it is in the 450 scenario, it becomes, I mean, significant after 2030. So likely in 15 years, we can have some results for incentivization in some areas of the world where there is still some carbon price, or maybe there can be some standards, but only if we have, I mean, a very climate, I mean, friendly scenario. Otherwise, likely we will need more time. At Europe, for instance, in the proposal of a revision of the emission trading system, there is a new point, for instance, regarding the funds for innovation that enable, I mean, players who want to get to the funds only to respect a performance standard for the power sector of 550 grams for CO2 per kilowatt hour. This is, for instance, a very important point. Is different, I mean, from market-based, because we are talking about standards, but this goes towards this transition pathway for the power sector, and can help, I mean, in the future, for instance, also incentivize CCS. If we consider CCS, for instance, applied to coal power plants, because a coal power plant can achieve, if you want to get, I mean, these funds can achieve this standard of 450 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour only if they apply CCS. The same, I would say, is, for instance, in UK, where they have also the performance standard in the power sector. This is actually displacing coal, is not incentivizing CCS. Anyways, summarizing, CO2 price is fundamental. Maybe also a performance standard with some other form of incentivization is also key for establishing, for deploying CCS in an important way, in an important rate.
Great, thanks, Renato. I think that was really helpful in covering off the broader question around how CCS is incentivized. One thing that I didn't spot you pick up on was the fact that, of course, CCS can also be incentivized if there is a value in the product being stored, so CO2. And this means that we don't always need a high or much larger sort of cost on carbon to incentivize its storage. And in fact, if we look at many of the kind of 15 or so large-scale CCS projects operating around the world today, I'd say probably the majority of them are doing so without a cost for carbon being deployed through policy, but instead they're using that carbon, for example, in enhanced oil recovery. So, there are opportunities out there that don't necessarily require that kind of ETS mechanism. Okay, so we have a bit more of a detailed question here now. Are we closer to using ceramic cables technology to transmit electricity over the grid and thereby reduce the current power losses associated with traditional metal cables? Brian, would you like to take this?
Okay, this is the first time I've used my degree for about 10 or 20 years. This is, in some ways, this is a similar challenge to the changing car population issue, really, in that although the technology is out there for to use ceramic superconductors and coated materials in order to generate power transmission cables. Obviously, this is a very significant part of infrastructure, and of course, where you have to sort of think about the scale of the transformation and the cost-benefit analysis that comes with it. And I think the infrastructure companies who are responsible for this obviously need to take that all into account. All I can say, I think from a technology point of view, we're nearer. I can't answer really for the transmission companies in particular, but I would expect that it would be a huge transformation to achieve it. But we're also seeing other areas where distributed energy is seen as an alternative to large-scale national grids as a lower emission solution to providing electricity.
Thanks. Renato, did you have anything to add on that?
No, it's very interesting. Actually, addressing efficiency in the transmission of electricity is key for a future in which we are considering, electrification, for instance, for the transport sector is one of the options for low carbon work. This is very interesting. It's very technical. I don't actually have information about that, but I appreciate. This comment is. It's worth to be further investigated. Thank you so much for this comment.
Okay, thanks. It looks like we're almost at the end of our time. I have one more question. What do you think is the best action an oil and gas company can take to demonstrate support for low emissions pathways? Renato, shall we start with you on that one?
Yes,
Or
I think that the oil and gas is already doing it. For instance, as per flaring, we were saying before that we updated 20% of GHGs so far, associated, I mean, with the associated gas, the volumes so far from in the last 7 years. What is important is to go ahead with efficiency on our operations. We have to go ahead with the reductions of methane emissions, for instance, that is also considered key for achieving the low carbon targets. But on the other hand, we have to start considering how to address energy efficiency among our consumers, our clients. We have to do more. We have to promote energy efficiency in the society. We have the capability. We know how to do it. We need to go ahead and to show that we are the right subject to help people use better the products that we put into the market.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, so as well as managing our own emissions and helping our consumers to manage theirs, obviously a key element of the role of oil and gas in low emissions pathways is, of course, to make particularly natural gas available as an energy source, as an alternative to higher carbon options. This will actually have a significant material impact to emissions in the short to medium term when gas is used as an alternative to other products such as coal.
Excellent. And I personally would add greater kind of support or calling for carbon capture and storage within policy circles as being a great way to demonstrate support, and also, of course, increase the size of the carbon budget that is available for future fossil fuel use. And on the subject of CCS, we have a question here, and this may have to be our final question. Are we comfortable with the use of CCS as a key strategy in lowering greenhouse gases, since we do not fully understand its long-term impact? So do either of you want to talk to the long-term, possible long-term effects of CCS?
Well, I can say that there's still a lot, I mean, to do to understand, I mean, what is the long-term impact of CCS, particular whether I think you're addressing the problem of whether CO2 will stay, I mean, in the reservoir or in the aquifer when it is injected. But on the other hand, I mean, there is no possibility, if we want really to address the 2 degrees C target, to go ahead without CCS. The long-term, I mean, impact is one of the key points to address. But I would say that I feel less comfortable maybe on the fact that CCS is expensive now, and we need to understand how to make it less expensive or to incentivize it. Rob was before saying that the EOR is one of the possibilities, but still we need to address how to reduce costs if we just inject CO2 for injecting it, so not for producing additional oil. And long-term impact is important for sure, but we do need CCS. Or otherwise, it's very difficult, maybe not possible to address.
Yeah, great, thank you, Renato. And Yeah, I mean, I've not. I mean, all the kind of studies that I'm aware of have shown that long-term CCS storage, is viable and doesn't appear to have any negative long-term adverse effects. Okay, so I think we will need to wrap it up there. It just leaves me to say thank you once again to our two speakers today, and thanks to you all for joining. I hope you've found it useful, and if you have any further questions or one of your questions you didn't get a chance to get asked, then please do get in touch with us after the webinar, and we'll be happy to try and help. And we will, again, be posting this webinar on the Ipieca website for people to listen to at their leisure. So thank you all for your time, and goodbye.
Thank you, Rob.